This is Winning IR, a podcast exploring the diverse insights within the IR community. Join me, Mark Fasken, as I sit down with IROs and other IR stakeholders to discuss the winning strategies, tactics, and shifts in thinking that are redefining the profession. Over the last few years, IR teams are increasingly becoming more proactive with buy-side engagement due to regulatory requirements and an evolution in standard practices in corporate access. During this evolution, it's become clear that there is some mystery surrounding buy-side corporate access and how IROs can begin to leverage these teams to benefit their outreach and relationships. Today's guest is AllianceBernstein's Chief Administrative Officer for Equities. Elizabeth Librizzi is an experienced professional with a history of working in various advisory roles in the banking industry. She has over 20 years of sell-side and corporate access experience at organizations such as Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse, and is a true strategic thinker with a mindset for value creation. We had a great conversation on this episode of the podcast, and she helped demystify the role of buy-side corporate access for IR teams to help build and develop relationships throughout the investment process cycle.
So Liz, for our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with corporate access, what is buy-side corporate access? How does it differ from sell-side corporate access?
Sure. So it's really not that different. And I'll put on my former sell-side hat for a second and say, when I was running sell-side corporate access desk in my prior life, my suite of clients was 200, 300 clients. Now I have the same job. I just have one client, and that's AB. And it may be the 200 or so people that are at AB, but the role is very much the same. And that's curating and partnering with our investment professionals to get the access to the corporate community they need to make their investment decisions, which is really no different than what I was doing and what any other sell-side corporate access desk is doing. So I would say the audience may be a little bit smaller. And a little bit more unique in terms of just the size of it, but the end product really is the same.
And why has AllianceBernstein, or AB as you say, amongst other firms, of course, created an internal corporate access team?
I can really only speak for us, why we did it, but I don't think it's that different why some of the other buy-side firms have done it. And corporate access is probably one of the newer offerings that the sell side was able to bring to the table in terms of rounding out their offering to their buy-side clients. And that's typically around a conference or around a corporate looking to get on the road. And it's not to say that we are not going to attend a conference, because we absolutely will. That's not to say we are not going to take a road show when one of our sell-side partners is bringing a corporate through town. But very often, we are doing our work on the investment side. We have some questions. We want to get access to the company. And it's very much a point in time situation versus anything else. And I would also say that, and we recognize this, corporate access is a finite resource, right? And kind of like what I said earlier, when you're on the sell side, you have hundreds of mouths to feed. So just because a corporate's coming through town at a certain point with one of our sell-side partners, that may not mean we're going to get access to them. And we understand that. And so it's really about us taking some ownership about, one, having that engagement when we're looking to have it. But two, and this is, I think, more important, and I want to be very clear, we're not looking to disintermediate the sell side in any way. They have a very important role in this process. But at AB, we are looking to develop relationships with corporates over time. And this is something we're going to own you for potentially years and years to come. And so it's really about developing that relationship with you from the outset and kind of fostering that as we go through the cycle of our investment process.
In some ways, it also, we had said this, I think, on our prep call, it really comes down to your point on being more intentional. Like the internal corporate access teams are very intentional about the companies that they are working with and bringing in to meet with the investment team, because there's a reason, right? Like the investment team, one of these groups is doing research or some sort of work, background work. It's not just, oh, you're in town, great, let's have a meeting.
I think that's important. It's not about taking a meeting for the sake of taking a meeting. There's
Right.
a real purpose to why we're asking for that access, whether we're asking for it directly to the corporate or whether we're asking one of our sell side partners for it. It's very intentional. It's not just for the sake of taking a meeting. Because I'll say on the
Okay.
flip side, there are often times where we may be targeted. I don't know if that's the right word, but a corporate's coming through town. AllianceBernstein is on their list of investors to see. We won't take that meeting if it doesn't make sense for where we are in our process with investing in the company. And we'll be very transparent about that. So it very much is coming at both the corporate directly and working with the sell side at point of intent.
And so, I mean, you coming from the sell side, obviously, you know that corporates rely very heavily on their sell side partners for corporate access and help with marketing and everything. But as you also know, there's been a big shift towards a lot of IROs doing more marketing themselves, taking a little bit more ownership of that part of the role. So how would you recommend IROs engage with internal corporate access teams like the team at AB?
So it's very important for me to convey to the listeners that we are not here, and by we, I mean my internal team. There's 3 of us. We manage the process globally out of New York. We are not here to disintermediate the corporates from the investors directly or the sell side from the investors directly. I view us as a conduit. AB is 31 teams globally, and many of whom have overlapping interests. And we very much partner with each other and share meetings. And often I find that a corporate may not have all of the touch points internally. So if nothing else, my team may be able to help that IR meet 5 or 6 other people within AB that are focused on their name that they may not have met before. And with that, again, goes to my earlier point, developing that relationship, that longer term relationship.
If a corporate was looking to get a meeting with an investor at AB, and let's say AB is not currently a holder, is there a higher likelihood of that corporate getting a meeting if they went through the corporate access team versus right to the investor or through the sell side?
I would say, I don't want to say a higher likelihood, but if an IR has one touch point and only one touch point, and that's an investor, maybe that's not the right touch point. And so that may get lost in their email. Very unintentional. I think if we both look at our emails right now, there's a lot in there and we're going to miss something.
Yeah.
My team, we have a centralized mailbox. That's all we see. And we're sectorized. So the team is actually focused on specific sectors. And so each individual team member is also tasked with working with the individual teams on their priorities. So while I don't want to say there's a higher likelihood, they will always get a response, whether it's yes, we'll take a meeting or no, we won't, when they come to our team. And additionally, we'll also probably be able to direct them to somebody who may want the meeting if they went into the wrong person initially. I like to say, and again, it goes back and I keep harping on this, so apologies. It's a relationship that we're looking to build over time. So if we ever come back and say no, it's typically not no, period. It's probably no, not right now. And here's why. And so we'll never let an email that a corporate sends into us die on the vine. We'll look to get back to them in some way with some type of feedback as to why a meeting may or may not be of interest to us at a specific time.
Well, I think that's hugely valuable because I will say that, to your point, I mean, investors and everybody's getting a lot of email, but I will say that many of the IROs that we talk to, they talk about outreach and things that they do. And a lot of people talk about how low the response rate is, right? And so I do think the fact that your team is far more likely to at least get back to them and say, hey, you're not right now, or here's a person you should talk to, or these are some of the reasons that it maybe isn't a fit size or sector or what have you. It's super valuable for the future outreach, right? Maybe in a year or two, they come back and say, hey, something changed and we're a better fit. So I do think that is extremely, extremely helpful. Yeah, I think that is one of the benefits of working with an internal corporate access team is that kind of open feedback and that longer-term relationship. And to that point, what would you say are some of the other benefits of working directly with the corporate access team at a firm like AB?
Yeah. So again, I think the firm-wide connectivity is very helpful. We also have a purview into how our investors will be working with the street. And by the street, I mean the sell side in the coming months. So very often a corporate will say to me, we can't do this meeting now, but we're going to be at so-and-so's conference in September. My team is positioned to say, you know what? We actually don't have anybody going to that conference. So perhaps we can find another time for us to connect. And it's also important for me to convey, my team is not here to make the corporate's lives more difficult from a scheduling and logistics standpoint. We will always partner with the sell side firm that we work with. But candidly, there are many firms that we don't have relationships with. And I'll also be, and my team, importantly, will be very forthcoming with that. So when a corporate comes to us and says, we're going to be marketing in New York or London with so-and-so, if we work with that firm, great. We'll look forward to partnering there on a meeting. No problem. But if we don't work with a firm, we'll also be very forthcoming with that because, look, we understand there's a commercial aspect to why a sell-side firm is marketing this trip to their, this meeting to their investors. And if we're not a client of theirs, it doesn't make sense. And we recognize that. We don't expect to get a meeting in that regard. But I also think it's important for the corporate to get that feedback because there are a lot of legs of the stool that maybe we're all not immediately focused on. So I think I may have been a little long-winded there, apologies, but I think the benefit of having a relationship with our centralized team is really having a purview into probably the broader scope of how we're looking at how we plan to engage in sell-side events in the coming months.
Do you find that a lot of the corporates and IR teams that you're working with are engaging with your team in that way? And they are asking, hey, we're owned by this fund within the firm. Are there other groups that we should be speaking to? Are they actually getting the benefit of that, do you think?
I think so. It sounds horrible to say, but COVID sort of was a blessing and a curse in that way. I think it forced the industry to rethink how they were engaging, the forums they were engaging. And I think the fact that maybe some geographical barriers came down, time barriers came down, I think that exposed a lot of investors and a lot of corporates to each other because candidly, what else were we doing? There was very little to do. I think, yes. I also think forums like this, where you, and I so appreciate it, give me the opportunity to talk about what my team is doing. More and more opportunities like this come up. I think the corporate community realizes we're here and we exist and we're actually here to be helpful to them. So to answer your question, I am seeing a lot of, I guess I'd call it reverse inquiry coming into us about engaging with our investors in some type of way. We think it's great because, again, it's a relationship business and we think that's how the relationships are built. We don't always feel like we need to sort of rely on a third party. And by the third party, in this case, I mean the sell side to help build that relationship. I think it's something we can do ourselves too. And that's what we've so appreciated. Again, forums like this giving us the opportunity to talk about what we're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was asking the question about whether people are getting the value, I was, just to clarify, more asking I'll say myself, feel as though, all IROs obviously have a full understanding of the value of working with corporate access teams. I think a lot of the time it's when do I email them? When do I not? And so I think this will be super useful for them to understand. A lot of people understand that the corporate access teams are also there to be sort of like advisors on what is the best way to engage with our firm and what's the best way to work with us, which is obviously super helpful.
And look, our clients are our internal counterparts. So the corporate should never feel like by emailing us, they are doing a disservice to the people that they already have connections with internally. invariably we're going to go to these people and say, so-and-so reached out. They're coming to New York. They're coming to London. Do we want a meeting? We don't keep anything from them. So typically what we find is often an IR is reaching out to an investor and they're reaching out to us as well. And that's perfectly fine because we're all talking to each other. We're all partners in this.
You talked about conferences just on this last question as you were talking about, what conferences are we going to be going to, which conferences may we not be going to. There's been a fair amount of discussion around sort of buy-side conferences. And so are you seeing a rise in those buy-side conferences? Are there buy-side conferences that people should be particularly aware of? What is your perspective on that?
There are. We've taken part in a couple that we've sort of curated ourselves. And so we're taking the approach that, and I should take a step back, our investors find a great deal of value in a sell-side sponsored conference. My team doesn't have the bandwidth or the logistical ability, quite frankly, to replicate a sell-side conference. There's a huge amount of value in getting a critical mass of people that are focused on the same sector together. So we can't replicate that. We don't want to. The approach we've taken is working with our investors to find niche topics that are very relevant to our immediate focus and curate an event around that. So, for example, we last year did an inaugural Small SMID conference. Small SMID cap is a very important part of AB's investment structure. We have a couple of teams where that is their primary mandate. And I don't think I'll be saying anything surprising to any of the IR professionals when I say sometimes it's a struggle for that market cap to get a full day of marketing when they come into a city. We partnered with another buy-side firm to create an event solely focused on that. It was a great event, and we'll replicate it again this year. We brought another buy-side counterparty in to do that with us. And again, it's a niche in the market that we're focused on that may not be a commercial opportunity for the sell side. Earlier this year, we also did an energy transition conference, very topical for us at the time. And we were able to bring together 20 companies over 3 days. We partnered with 2 other buy-side firms where that was thematically an important topic for them as well. Will we do it again next year? Maybe not, because I'm starting to see a lot of other energy transition conferences pop up on the sell side. And that's great. That's great. And so we would go there. So we're looking for kind of dislocations in the marketplace and focusing on that. I don't see us trying to replicate a tech conference or a healthcare conference, at least now. That could change. But we're really focused on dislocations in the marketplace.
And I'm assuming, though, when you're doing those, you're looking for sort of these niche topics, as you said, so they could be changing all the time. But again, you're very intentional as a group about what are the topics that we care about right now. And then I assume also, what are the companies that we want to be there because they're, very knowledgeable in the space or leaders in the space. And so you're sort of handpicking some of those groups. But I assume that's also the benefit of having a relationship with a corporate access team. You're on the radar when those conferences pop up.
Yeah, look, I think the small SMID one is here to stay. I think that's something that, at least from our perspective and the buy-side partners that we have teamed up with, it's an important topic, an important thematic investment thesis that will continue to resonate with us. That's here to stay, I believe. At least that's the plan. And to your point, the roster of companies that are invited may change from year to year. We obviously want critical mass. We want the companies to have a great experience when they're here. If it's just one host that has interest in meeting with them, that may not be a great use of the corporate's time, and we'll try to figure out another way to work them in to our marketing plans. But yeah, we will absolutely target specific companies to attend these events, again, so they have a great experience.
Another benefit that I feel exists in working with the buy-side corporate access team, and this is something that you have mentioned to me on our sort of prep call, is feedback, right? I mean, I think a lot of corporates, a lot of IROs spend a lot of time marketing And sometimes you're left guessing, like, how did that go? What do people think? And so I won't answer the question for you, but you've come from the sell side, you've experienced feedback and what that looks like from a sell side perspective. I'll speak for myself and say a lot of corporates really struggle to get it regardless of who set up the meeting.
Mhm.
But how does the buy side corporate access team's approach to feedback differ from that of the sell side?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one, even here, being on the buy side for almost 5 years, we struggle with a little bit. And I think it goes back to what I said earlier about the relationship building. If a corporate has a meeting with AB, whether it's in our offices or virtually at a conference, and they come away and don't have a sense for how that meeting went, I think our investors would be disappointed. They prep pretty intensely for these meetings. And so I like to think there is a really good sense of when they come away from the meetings, how it went. That said, there's always an element that may be a little more constructive and may want to have a follow-up or a one-on-one. And I think the buy side's reticence to sharing that with sell side is, and I understand this is now I'm putting on my former sell side hat, we would ask for anonymous feedback. I'm not sure, and maybe this is a rhetorical question for your listeners and they can, come back to me with their answers, but I'm not sure how helpful anonymous feedback is because I suspect you'd want to have a real understanding for the meat of what that feedback is. So very often our investment professionals will do a follow-up with IR directly, particularly if there's something maybe a little more constructive that type of takeaway from the meeting. And I don't know that we would want to share that with the sell side. We don't know what happens with that. And it goes back to the relationship building between us and the corporate. And I think us sharing that feedback, good or bad, works towards building that relationship. And so I think we would much rather do that on a one-to-one basis. Also, when a corporate is being hosted by the sell side, we have a no broker policy. So brokers aren't in the meetings. And that's by design, quite frankly. And so again, it just all ties back to us having that one-to-one communication with the corporate, which is so important as we build that relationship over time.
And so I think it sounds to me as though you have a bit of a better chance of getting more direct, comprehensive feedback from the buy side if you're sort of working with them directly. If you're coming through the corporate access team, it sounds like your team will also sort of help to set that up, right? You'll sort of help if there's a question, a group could come back to your team and say, hey, we feel like it would be really helpful to get a little bit of feedback, and you could help to set that up potentially.
100%. And that goes whether we set up the meeting directly or the meeting came to us through the sell side. And very often when the sell side does come to us for feedback, we will say we'd prefer to go to the company directly.
So what was the biggest surprise for you going from sell side to buy side corporate access?
The biggest surprise was that it wasn't a surprise. I thought it would have been a little more eye-opening. And it definitely was. Building something that wasn't here before was a lot of fun, and it continues to evolve. COVID is and the pandemic has sort of had that evolve at a different pace than I thought. But sitting down with all of our teams and understanding their pain points and recognizing that they were not so different than the pain points I was hearing when I was on the sell side. And so being able to develop a process, because like I was on the sell side for a long time, and I was on the sell side in a variety of roles. I was a salesperson. I ran corporate access. And for me, those relationships are key. And so bringing in somebody that could be viewed as a disintermediary and a threat to that relationship, I was very cognizant of not being that person. And so how could I develop a process that everybody wins? And I say it flippantly because not everybody wins, but that was really kind of how I wanted to develop this. And I think we've gotten pretty close to where everybody feels we've put something together where we can see the benefits of what we've tried to do. and not at the expense of people's individual relationships, whether it be with the sell side or the corporates directly. We've taken a lot in-house over the last couple of years, more than I would have thought. And again, I think the pandemic sort of spurred that a little bit. And also, I think recognizing that there is a willingness from the corporate community to maybe speak with us off cycle, and by off cycle, maybe not when they're marketing with a sell side firm.
Yep. Well, I think that a lot of corporates like the idea of speaking off cycle and going direct, but probably aren't always sure exactly how to go about it. And so that actually leads me to my next question. What would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions, or maybe the biggest misconception as it relates to buy-side corporate access?
That we are a disintermediary. I think that was, and look, as a former sell-sider, when these desks started to emerge and I was on the sell side, I was shouting that the loudest. And I just didn't see how there would be room for everybody at the table. And there very much is, because it's a very different offering and it's a very different ask. I think the sell side has been really surprised that coming out of the pandemic, our investors are asking for more and more group meetings at their events, because they've been missing that connectivity, kind of the buzz in the room type of situation that you get from a group event or a conference. And we can't replicate that. We can't replicate the group event. I actually tried during the pandemic to see if I could partner with some buy-side firms that would want to do that. And it was a tough call. And so we realized it probably wasn't worth pursuing. But I think the biggest misconception is that we are here to disintermediate either the sell side from the investors or the corporates from the investors. And that's very much not the case. I view us as a conduit, the traffic cop that sits in the middle and directs people to where they need to be at the time they need to be there.
There's a ton of really good points that have come out of this that I think are helpful to summarize it. I mean, I like to use the word conduit because I also think that there is at times a perception that the corporate access team is like they're the gatekeepers, which to your point, it's like, well, in some degrees we are, in that, email us, we'll give you feedback on whether we think it's the right time or not, but we're not saying no. We're just telling you we're focused on something else right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very useful. I do think that idea of the conduit and like the connectivity across the teams is super helpful, because I think, a lot of IROs, as you probably know, are they're very focused on like, let's get new investor. And sometimes it's like, but you already have A, B, and you've got this one fund. Well, there's like 5 other funds. Maybe spend your time on building out that relationship, which is great. The events, streamlining the process, the value of the feedback that your team and the investors provide, I think are all super useful. And so the one thing that jumped out to me in this conversation and in our sort of prep call was that your team can really act as like that advisor in some respect, right? On the best way to engage with AB, and that long-term relationship, I think, is super useful.
That was my hope when I came over. I'm pleased to say that's really what we've been able to implement as we do more and more on our own. And again, not at the expense of the street, just sort of where people's priorities are falling. I feel like we've continued to develop that cohesive relationship, both internally and with the corporate community, that makes it a little more fluid to deal with us. That's the hope. We're a complex organization. We recognize that. And my team is here to really try to demystify that as well.
Well, I hope that this episode demystifies a little bit more about buy-side corporate access. Yeah, me too.
I hope so.
And hopefully, I hope that your team gets a bunch of emails after this podcast goes live.
Yes, but we are completely accessible. I think we're all on LinkedIn too. So feel free to look for us if you have any questions. We're always happy to help.
Awesome. Liz, this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Winning IR. For more winning ideas, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Irwin, a better way to manage investor relations. For more information, visit www.getirwin.com.